Wow.
Big thanks to Napoleon Grills for sponsoring this episode.
This is why the foilboat method is gonna save your brisket on a Kettle grill. This type of grill is probably the most sold grill in the world. And there's a good reason for that. It has a beautiful large cooking surface, and the round shape makes sure that the food cooks in an amazing way. Hot air swirling all around, making everything crispy and delicious. But there's a downside to this grill, because that heat that sits inside that grill is gonna be so close to that giant piece of meat that all of the radiation heat that's there is going to dry out the bottom of your brisket. And you don't want that. I once was cooking ribs with the foilboat method. And that foilboat method was, well, it didn't give me the result I was looking for on my ribs. And the underside of those ribs turned soggy. For the ribs, it wasn't the best outcome. However, for our brisket, it might just be the solution. So today we're gonna make brisket on the Kettle grill. And as you can see, this is a whole packer brisket with a lot of fat on the bottom still and a lot of fat on top. So I'm gonna trim that fat on top off to a minimum, but I do want to keep a little bit of that fat sitting on top. On the bottom side, I'm gonna remove all that fat, clearing it up completely, and then I'm gonna cut out the big chunks of fat that will not render down during the cooking process. Of course, this brisket is gonna need some seasoning. That's why I'm gonna give you my PitmasterX Texas style beef rub. It starts with 2 tablespoons of salt, 1 tablespoon of ground black pepper, 2 tablespoons onion powder, and 1 tablespoon garlic powder. Mix that up and your Texas style beef rub is done. I'm gonna season my brisket with the rub that I just made, and the trick is to season it as evenly as possible. So I'm gonna take my bowl and from a high distance, I'm going to sprinkle it onto my brisket. Flip it around, do the same for the fat cap side. Make sure you do the sides as well. And if the seasoning is to your liking, of course you can also go straight up pepper and salt, but this stuff is absolute magic and it's ready for the barbecue. I'm gonna fire up my Napoleon Kettle Pro, set in a large block of smoke wood, put the briquettes behind the smoke wood. Now we created a large indirect surface behind that block of wood. That block of wood is gonna block out any radiation heat towards that brisket. I'm gonna take some wood wool, place it onto my briquettes, and then light up the briquettes on one side of the grill. This fire is going to run from one side to the other side while keeping my barbecue stable at a temperature of 120 degrees Celsius. The wood will burn down. I'm going to put in the grill grates and I'm going to set them to the highest position. Now it's time to place my brisket on. On this side I got my direct heat and on this side I got the indirect heat. This is the safe zone for my brisket. I'm going to place the thickest part of the brisket towards the hottest part of the grill. Now I'm going to close the lid and let this brisket smoke. Now you might wonder, when is this whole foilboat thing going to happen? That's going to happen when we got the right color on our brisket. We're cooking not to temperature, but to color. I'm checking every hour to see if that brisket is ready for the foilboat method. I've been smoking my brisket for 4 hours and this is the result. I got a beautiful red mahogany color on my brisket, which means it's picking up smoke, and I got a little bit of bark forming on the outside. I'm really liking the way this brisket looks, but it had a lot of heat to endure. And by looking at that crust, it's time to apply the foilboat technique. So I'm gonna lay down some aluminum foil and another layer crust. Now instead of wrapping this brisket up in aluminum foil, I'm gonna shrink that aluminum foil up, creating a dam around that brisket so that it holds in all the fluids and protects the meat from radiation heat at the same time. As you can see, it's very easy to do. It's a technique that you can apply at home on your own barbecue, and it makes sense because all of this right here is protection for this beautiful piece of meat. No more brisket burned ends. Well, you can have some brisket burned ends. It's not gonna be an accidental brisket burned ends. It's gonna be on purpose because this thing is gonna be so good and so tasty and all made on your Kettle grill. I'm gonna add some more briquettes to my fire. Then I'm going to put the brisket on, close the lid and let it continue to cook at a temperature of 120 degrees Celsius. I just got the notification from my thermometer that the foil boat brisket is done. It reached a core temperature of 92 degrees Celsius. Look at that bark that we built up. Insane. This is a very, very handsome brisket. I do see that there's a little bit of puddling over here and it definitely affected the bark. But the good thing is the brisket was protected all this time. So there's no burn marks. There's no effect of the barbecue on that bark in a bad way. And I don't think I ever made a more beautiful brisket on a Kettle grill. Of course, we kept those juices sitting in the foil boat, making sure that it stayed nice and juicy. Now I'm gonna take this off and I'm gonna let it rest. And another great way to check if your brisket is done is by poking it. And as you can see, it just slides right in. The way that I'm gonna wrap this up, I'm going to take that brisket out of that foil boat, place it on the butcher's paper, put all of the juices on top of that brisket, wrap it up, put it in my oven, and set that oven to 65 degrees Celsius. That is called the resting period. And I'm gonna leave it there for at least 10 hours. 10 hours in the oven, 65 degrees Celsius, and this is the end result. Look at that, a Kettle brisket that looks like this. Look at that wiggle, come on. Good wiggle, good bark. That is one beautiful brisket. Of course, the real proof is on the inside. Wow. That is one crazy juicy brisket. Very important to me is that the fat rendered out, and you can tell by how the meat almost tears apart. There's no intramuscular fat left in it thanks to the long resting period in the oven. You got the holy triangle: bark, smoke ring, juicy meat, perfectly rendered. Pull test, perfect. This technique works wonders, and especially in a Kettle grill. You got the fire, you got the indirect zone, that's where your brisket is sitting, but in a Kettle grill you need extra protection. So that foil boat is gonna give it to you. You're just gonna smoke your brisket, and when you like the color, you're gonna move it into that foil boat, let it continue to cook until it's done, wrap it up, put it in your oven at 65 degrees Celsius, let it rest, and you will have the most amazing brisket of your life ever from the Kettle grill. Oh, that's ridiculous.